There are secrets that cling to a town like the dust of forgotten years, settling in the cracks of old floorboards and whispering through the leaves of ancient trees. They are the kind of secrets that, when finally unearthed, don't just shock, but reshape the very ground you walk on, proving that sometimes the most monstrous truths are hidden in plain sight. This is a story about such a secret, a truth so raw and devastating that it consumed a life, a family, and an entire community. It's a tale woven with threads of innocence and betrayal, of love twisted into something unrecognizable, and of a legacy so poisoned it cast a shadow over generations. Our story begins not in a bustling city, but in the quiet, unassuming town of Havenwood, a name that, in retrospect, feels like a cruel irony. Havenwood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest news was usually a new coat of paint on the general store or the outcome of the high school football game. It was a town built on community, on shared history, and on the comforting illusion of predictability. But beneath that veneer of small-town charm, a darkness festered, personified by a man whose name was rarely spoken without a shiver. A man who became, over the years, the town's most hated figure, Elias Thorne. Elias wasn't just disliked. He was loathed. A towering, gaunt man with eyes like chips of flint and a sneer perpetually etched onto his thin lips. He exuded an aura of menace that kept most people at arm's length. He owned the local lumber mill, a sprawling, grimy operation that was the lifeblood of many families in Havenwood. Yet he ran it with an iron fist, squeezing every last drop of profit from his workers and the land. Whispers followed him like a shadow, rumors of cruelty, of shady dealings, of a temper that could flare into violent outbursts with little provocation. Children would cross the street rather than pass his property. Adults would avert their gaze, muttering prayers under their breath when he was near. He was the bogeyman of Havenwood, the cautionary tale whispered to unruly children, the unspoken reason why many families would pack up and leave, seeking solace in a world far removed from Thorne's oppressive presence. Into this world, this suffocating atmosphere, stepped a young woman named Sarah. Sarah wasn't from Havenwood. She arrived like a spring breeze, a burst of color in a monochrome landscape. Her laughter was infectious. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, held a spark of unyielding optimism. She was an artist, drawn to the quiet beauty of the surrounding forests and the slow, rhythmic pulse of rural life. She rented a small, dilapidated cottage on the outskirts of town, far enough from Thorne's mill to offer some respite, yet still within the town's gossiping grasp. Sarah was an outlier, a free spirit who didn't understand the town's unspoken rules, its deep-seated fears. And perhaps that was what made her vulnerable. She met David, a kind, earnest young man who worked at the general store. David was everything Elias Thorne was not: gentle, compassionate, and deeply rooted in the community. Their love story was a quiet one, blossoming amidst shared glances over the counter and long walks along the river. Their romance was a breath of fresh air for Havenwood, a rare spot of unblemished joy in a town often overshadowed by its dark undercurrents. People smiled when they saw Sarah and David together, a silent hope that perhaps, just perhaps, love could conquer the lingering shadow that Thorne cast. They married in a simple ceremony, exchanging vows beneath the old oak tree in the town square, a tree that had witnessed generations of Havenwood's history, both good and bad. Their life together was idyllic, a sanctuary built on trust and mutual adoration. Sarah continued her painting, finding inspiration in David's steady presence and the comforting rhythm of their shared life. They dreamed of a future filled with children, a house bustling with laughter, a life far removed from the cold grip of fear that Elias Thorne seemed to embody. Then came the news, a whisper at first, then a ripple, and finally a crashing wave that shattered their peaceful existence. Sarah was pregnant. The joy was immeasurable, a pure, unadulterated happiness that filled their small cottage. David was ecstatic, his face a canvas of pure delight. They spent hours talking about names, about nurseries, about the dreams they held for their little one. They imagined a life of boundless love, a child shielded from the world's harsh realities, especially from the darkness that lurked within Havenwood itself. But fate, as it often does, had a cruel twist in store. The first hint of trouble came not from a sudden illness, but from a subtle shift in Sarah's demeanor. A shadow seemed to flicker in her warm eyes, a fleeting moment of unease that David, ever attentive, noticed but couldn't quite place. She became more withdrawn, her laughter less frequent, her gaze often distant. David attributed it to the usual anxieties of pregnancy, the immense responsibility of bringing a new life into the world. He tried to reassure her, to soothe her fears, but a sense of dread, cold and insistent, began to settle in his own heart. He saw the way she would sometimes flinch when Elias Thorne's name was mentioned, how her hands would tremble almost imperceptibly. He dismissed it as a natural aversion to the town's pariah, but the feeling persisted, a nagging unease that grew with each passing week. As Sarah's pregnancy progressed, so too did her inexplicable distress. One evening, David found her weeping silently in the kitchen, her face streaked with tears, her body shaking. When he pressed her, she confessed, her voice a strained whisper, about strange, unsettling dreams, nightmares of a looming shadow, of a cold touch, of a voice that filled her with terror. She couldn't articulate the source of her fear, only that it felt ancient, primal, tied to something unspeakable. David held her close, trying to banish the nightmares with his embrace, but the seeds of doubt had been planted, cold and sharp, in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something far more sinister than typical pregnancy anxieties was at play. The town, as small towns often do, had its own rhythm of whispers and observations. As Sarah's belly swelled, a few of the older women, with eyes that had seen too much, began to exchange knowing glances. Comments, disguised as innocent inquiries, started to surface. "Doesn't she look a little different, somehow? The baby's due date seems a bit off, doesn't it?" These were the quiet, insidious remarks that pricked at David's conscience, even as he furiously dismissed them. He loved Sarah fiercely, his devotion absolute. He refused to entertain any notion that would tarnish their love, their shared dream. Then came the day of the birth, a difficult, prolonged labor that stretched into the pre-dawn hours. David was a nervous wreck, pacing outside the small room, his heart hammering against his ribs. When the cry finally came, a fragile, beautiful sound, a wave of relief washed over him. He rushed in, ready to embrace his wife, to meet his child, to finally banish the creeping dread that had shadowed their lives. But what he saw shattered his world. The baby, a little girl, was beautiful, undeniably so. But as David looked at her, truly looked, his breath hitched. The baby had eyes that were an unsettling, piercing shade of blue, unlike Sarah's warm honey or his own gentle brown. And then he saw the set of her jaw, the peculiar curve of her nose, the way her tiny, almost imperceptible frown mirrored something he had seen countless times. A chilling, horrifying familiarity. It was the face of Elias Thorne. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on David, suffocating him. His mind reeled, frantically searching for an explanation, for any way to reconcile what he saw with the woman he loved, with the life they had built. But there was no escaping the truth, stark and undeniable, staring back at him from the innocent face of his newborn daughter. The world tilted on its axis. The joy, the hope, the dreams, all of it crumbled into dust, replaced by a cold, searing agony. This wasn't his child. And the horrifying implication, the brutal, unvarnished truth, slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. Her real father was the town's most hated man, the man everyone despised, the man who cast a pall over Havenwood, was the father of his wife's child. The secret, so monstrous and unspeakable, had finally revealed itself in the most agonizing way imaginable. The quiet tragedy of Sarah's life, the unspeakable act that had brought this child into the world, was now laid bare, promising to unravel everything. This was just the beginning of a nightmare that would consume them all. The silence in that small birthing room was deafening, a vacuum where joy should have been. David stood frozen, the image of his daughter's face, Elias Thorne's face, burned into his retinas. Sarah lay exhausted, eyes closed, a faint, contented smile gracing her lips, unaware of the earthquake that had just ripped through David's world. He wanted to scream, to rail against the injustice, to demand answers, but the words were lodged in his throat, choked by a cocktail of betrayal, despair, and a horrifying sense of understanding. The vague anxieties, the unexplained distress, Sarah's flinches at Thorne's name, it all coalesced into a grotesque tapestry of truth. He stumbled out of the room, the midwife casting him a sympathetic glance, perhaps sensing the shift in the air, the sudden chill that had permeated their small home. David wandered aimlessly, the quiet streets of Havenwood feeling like a mockery. The trees, the houses, the very air seemed to hum with the unspoken secret, a secret he had unknowingly carried, protected, and now, finally, discovered. How could this be? How could the woman he loved, the woman who epitomized purity and kindness, be entangled with a monster like Elias Thorne? The questions hammered at him, relentless and unforgiving. When he finally confronted Sarah, days later, after the initial haze of shock had begun to dissipate, the conversation was not the explosive confrontation he might have envisioned. Instead, it was a quiet, agonizing unraveling. Sarah, still fragile from childbirth, looked at him with eyes that held an ocean of sorrow. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. The truth was etched on her daughter's face. What followed was a confession, whispered in halting, broken sentences. A story so tragic and horrific it made David's blood run cold. It had happened shortly after she arrived in Havenwood, before she met David. Sarah, a newcomer, innocent and trusting, had been looking for work to support her art. The lumber mill, Elias Thorne's domain, was the only place offering steady employment. Desperate and unaware of the monster that lurked within its walls, she had approached Thorne directly. He had seemed, at first, deceptively polite, almost charming in his gruff way, promising her a good wage, a chance to truly settle in Havenwood. But the charm was a thin veil easily shed. What followed was a nightmare, a violation perpetrated in the isolated, echoing office of the lumber mill. Thorne, a man who saw women as objects to be exploited, had taken advantage of her vulnerability, her isolation, her naive trust. She had been terrified, paralyzed by fear and shame, unable to cry out, unable to fight back against his brute strength. She had fled, the memory a searing brand on her soul, vowing never to speak of it, to bury it deep within her. The shame was a heavy cloak, suffocating her. When she met David, he was a beacon of light, a promise of a life free from the darkness that Thorne represented. She had truly believed she could outrun her past, that their love, so pure and unwavering, could erase the scar. She had convinced herself that the child she carried was theirs, conceived in love, a testament to their bond. But the cruel hand of genetics, the undeniable stamp of Elias Thorne, had shattered that illusion. She wept, not just for herself, but for the life she had unknowingly jeopardized, for the man she had inadvertently brought into this agonizing deception, and for the innocent child caught in the crossfire of a secret too terrible to bear. David listened, his heart breaking anew with each agonizing detail. The anger he felt, the betrayal, was now tempered with a profound, soul-wrenching pity for Sarah. She wasn't a villain. She was a victim, scarred by a monster, forced to carry a secret that had festered within her. But the reality of the situation remained. This child, his beloved daughter, was biologically Elias Thorne's. How could he look at her, hold her, love her, knowing whose blood ran in her veins? How could he protect her from a legacy so tainted? The days that followed were a blur of hushed conversations, of shared tears, of an agonizing debate that tore at the very fabric of their marriage. Sarah, in her despair, suggested leaving Havenwood, fleeing the town that held so many painful memories. But David knew it was more complicated than that. Elias Thorne was a powerful man, his influence insidious, reaching far beyond the walls of his mill. And what about the child? Could they truly sever her ties to her biological father, even if he was a monster? The answer came, not from a logical conclusion, but from an undeniable truth that settled deep in David's heart. He looked at the tiny, innocent face of the baby, her small hands grasping his finger, and saw not Elias Thorne, but a vulnerable, blameless soul. This child, regardless of her origins, was a product of circumstance, a life brought into the world without her consent. She deserved love, protection, and a chance at a normal life, free from the shadow of her biological father's wickedness. David made a decision, a monumental one born of profound love and a fierce sense of justice. He would raise her as his own. He would love her, fiercely and unconditionally. They would keep the secret, burying it deeper than any grave, protecting this fragile life from the truth that could destroy her. It was a perilous path, fraught with danger, but it was the only path he could envision. They named her Lily, a delicate, beautiful name, a stark contrast to the thorny secret she carried. They moved forward, clinging to the fragile hope that love could truly conquer all, that a secret so devastating could remain buried forever. But secrets, especially those steeped in darkness, have a way of surfacing. Havenwood, with its network of whispers and knowing glances, was not a place where anything truly stayed hidden. And Elias Thorne, the man who had inflicted such pain, was still very much a presence, a malevolent shadow lurking in the periphery of their lives. Lily grew, a bright, inquisitive child, full of joy and laughter. She was the sunshine in their lives, a constant reminder of the decision David had made, the immense burden he carried. He loved her with every fiber of his being, sometimes so fiercely it ached, knowing that his love had to compensate for the hidden truth. Sarah, slowly, began to heal, finding solace in Lily's innocence and David's unwavering support. Their marriage, once rocked to its foundations, rebuilt itself on a new kind of strength, forged in the crucible of shared adversity and a deeply held secret. But the town's whispers never truly ceased. As Lily grew older, the resemblance, subtle at first, became more pronounced. The same unsettling blue eyes, the same resolute jawline, a certain defiant tilt to her head. The similarities to Elias Thorne, though often fleeting, were undeniable to those who looked closely, especially those who harbored suspicions. Old Mr. Henderson, who had known Thorne since he was a boy, would sometimes stop in the street, his eyes narrowed, following Lily as she skipped by. Mrs. Gable, the town busybody, would offer overly sweet compliments about Lily's strong features, her gaze lingering on the child's face with an uncomfortable intensity. David and Sarah would exchange anxious glances, their hearts quickening, a cold dread washing over them. Every casual remark, every prolonged look, felt like a threat, a chisel chipping away at the fragile wall they had built around their secret. Elias Thorne himself, oblivious or perhaps deliberately ignoring the existence of Lily, continued to be Havenwood's dark monarch. His mill prospered, his wealth grew, and his reputation for cruelty remained untarnished. He was a constant, looming presence, a reminder of the nightmare that had brought Lily into their lives. David often found himself fantasizing about confronting Thorne, of shouting the truth to the rooftops, of exposing the monster for what he was. But the thought of Lily, of the devastating impact such a revelation would have on her innocent world, always held him back. The secret, heavy and suffocating, remained their burden alone. They lived in a constant state of hypervigilance, their lives defined by the need to protect Lily, to shield her from the venomous truth that threatened to poison her existence. The sword of Damocles hung over their heads, waiting for the inevitable moment when it would fall. The shadow of Elias Thorne, though largely unseen by Lily, was a constant, suffocating presence in David and Sarah's lives. It was a silent agreement, an unspoken pact that permeated every aspect of their existence. Protect Lily at all costs. This protection manifested in countless ways, from the careful curating of conversations when others were around to the frantic, heart-stopping moments when Lily would inadvertently mimic one of Thorne's mannerisms, a tilt of the head or a peculiar intensity in her gaze, sending a fresh wave of panic through her parents. They lived on edge, a perpetual state of heightened alert, forever scanning the horizon for any sign of exposure. As Lily transitioned from a carefree child into a curious teenager, the questions began. Innocent at first, about family history, about grandparents she barely knew, about the old photographs that adorned the mantelpiece. Sarah and David had carefully constructed a narrative, a carefully edited version of their past that omitted the dark chapters. They spoke of a distant aunt who had passed away, of a grandmother who lived too far to visit often. Each fabrication, no matter how small, felt like a tiny cut, a constant reminder of the monumental lie they were forced to uphold. They yearned to be honest with their daughter, to offer her the full, unvarnished truth, but the fear was always greater. The fear of shattering her world, of seeing the light dim in her eyes, of tainting her pure spirit with the stain of Thorne's evil. Lily, being naturally perceptive, began to notice the subtle tensions, the quick glances exchanged between her parents, the sudden changes in conversation when she entered a room. She also inevitably noticed Elias Thorne, not as her father, of course, but as the strange, intimidating man who owned the lumber mill. The whispers about him, though hushed, still permeated the small town's air. Kids at school would tell ghost stories about his property, about the strange lights seen at night, about his rumored cruelty. Lily, with her innate sense of justice, found him unsettling, but dismissed him as just another eccentric, if unpleasant, adult. One particular incident stands out, a moment that sent a cold shiver down David's spine. Lily, around 12 years old, was learning to carve wood, a hobby she'd picked up after seeing some intricate bird figurines at a local craft fair. She was surprisingly skilled, her small hands deftly shaping the wood with a sharp carving knife. One afternoon, David found her hunched over a piece of oak, meticulously carving a bird. He complimented her work, proud of her burgeoning talent. She looked up, her blue eyes bright with concentration, and said, "Dad, do you think Mr. Thorne would like this? They say he knows a lot about wood from his mill." The innocent question hung in the air, a poisoned arrow aimed straight at David's heart. He felt a wave of nausea, a sudden, blinding fear. He quickly steered the conversation away, telling her Thorne was too busy, too preoccupied with his business to appreciate such delicate artistry. Lily, sensing his discomfort, didn't press the issue, but a flicker of confusion crossed her face. The incident served as a chilling reminder that their secret was perpetually vulnerable, always one innocent question away from crumbling. As Lily matured, the physical resemblance to Thorne became more undeniable, especially to the few keen-eyed observers in Havenwood who still harbored their suspicions. His piercing blue eyes, once a source of comfort when David attributed them to Sarah's distant relatives, now seemed to scream Thorne's paternity. The set of her jaw, the way she held herself when she was determined, these were the subtle, insidious echoes that chipped away at David's carefully constructed peace. He saw the looks, the knowing nods, the furtive whispers that followed Lily, and felt a burning rage, a desperate need to protect her from the cruel judgments of a town that didn't know the full story. The psychological toll on Sarah was immense. The secret had not only robbed her of her innocence but continued to haunt her daily. She lived with a constant ache of guilt, believing herself to be the architect of their complex deception. There were nights David would find her awake, staring into the darkness, silent tears tracking paths down her cheeks. She spoke of the weight of the lie, the fear that one day it would all come crashing down, destroying Lily's happiness. David would hold her, reassure her, remind her of their shared commitment, their unwavering love for Lily, but he knew her pain was profound, a wound that might never truly heal. The town, as if sensing the unspoken tension, seemed to intensify its veiled scrutiny. A persistent, almost morbid curiosity surrounded Lily, though she remained blissfully unaware of its true nature. The women at the local market would offer unsolicited advice about her appearance, about how she should dress her hair, her clothes, as if trying to obscure the undeniable similarities to Thorne. Men at the general store would sometimes fall silent when Lily entered, their gazes lingering on her with an unreadable mixture of pity and suspicion. David found himself growing increasingly isolated, his friendships strained by his constant vigilance, his inability to relax, to truly be himself. The secret was not just a burden. It was a cage. Then the first tremor of true danger struck. It came in the form of a confrontation between David and Elias Thorne. It was a seemingly innocuous encounter at the lumber mill, where David had gone to pick up some timber for a small repair project at home. Thorne, emerging from his office, his presence radiating an almost palpable aura of cold authority, had stopped David with a curt gesture. His eyes, those chillingly familiar blue eyes, fixed on David with an unnerving intensity. "Your girl," Thorne rasped, his voice like gravel. "She's got spirit. Seen her around town. Looks like she takes after her mother. Feisty." David's blood ran cold. The words, seemingly innocuous, felt like a veiled threat, a predatory assessment. Thorne's gaze flickered, a hint of something unreadable, almost knowing, in their depths. David forced a polite, neutral response, his heart hammering against his ribs, his hands clenched into fists. He escaped the mill, shaken to his core, the implication of Thorne's words echoing in his mind. Had Thorne recognized her? Did he know? Or was it just a cruel twist of fate, a coincidental observation? The uncertainty was agonizing. The incident ignited a new, desperate urgency in David. He realized that the secret, no matter how carefully guarded, was always at risk. Thorne was a dangerous man, unpredictable and powerful. If he ever truly put the pieces together, if he ever chose to claim Lily, their world would shatter irrevocably. The fear transformed into a fierce protectiveness, a desperate need to ensure Lily's future, to secure her happiness far away from the toxic influence of Havenwood and its most hated resident. He began to subtly encourage Lily to consider colleges far from home, to explore opportunities in larger cities, gently nudging her towards a future that would offer her true freedom. Sarah, though terrified by David's encounter with Thorne, understood the necessity. They began to plan, quietly, surreptitiously, for Lily's departure. It was a bittersweet prospect. Letting go of their beloved daughter, sending her into the vast unknown, was painful. But the alternative, keeping her tethered to a town steeped in a lie, was unbearable. They wanted her to thrive, to flourish, unburdened by the weight of their past. The secret, a monstrous entity that had defined their lives for so long, seemed to be tightening its grip, pushing them towards an impossible choice, a heartbreaking sacrifice. The stakes had never been higher. Their fragile peace was hanging by a thread, and it felt as though the very air was charged with an impending storm, waiting to unleash the full fury of their hidden truth. The years leading up to Lily's departure for college were a study in quiet desperation for David and Sarah. Every moment felt precious, tinged with the sadness of an impending separation, yet simultaneously infused with the fierce hope that this separation would be Lily's liberation. They poured all their love into her, creating a fortress of normalcy around her, shielding her from the growing unease that permeated Havenwood. The town, it seemed, was reaching a boiling point with Elias Thorne. His callous business practices, his disregard for the environment, and a particularly egregious incident involving a local family losing their land to his expansion, had pushed the community to its breaking point. The hatred for him was no longer a quiet simmer. It was a roaring inferno. Lily, in her youthful idealism, became involved in local activism against Thorne's mill, unknowingly fighting against the man who was her biological father. She organized petitions, attended town hall meetings, and spoke with impassioned eloquence about environmental justice and community rights. David and Sarah watched her, a mixture of pride and profound dread churning within them. Every time she spoke Thorne's name with righteous anger, they felt a pang of guilt, a cold fear that their carefully constructed world would crumble around her. Yet they couldn't stop her. This was Lily, her spirit untamed, her sense of justice unyielding. The day Lily left for college was a torrent of emotions. Tears mixed with forced smiles, goodbyes laden with unspoken anxieties. As her car disappeared down the long, winding road out of Havenwood, David and Sarah stood hand in hand, a strange mix of emptiness and relief washing over them. The immediate threat, the constant fear of accidental exposure, had momentarily receded. But a new fear took its place. The fear of the secret coming to light when Lily was no longer under their immediate protection, when she was far away, vulnerable and unprepared. Life in Havenwood, without Lily's bright presence, felt heavier, the silence in their home more profound. The tension surrounding Elias Thorne escalated. Legal battles ensued, environmental investigations began, and the town council, emboldened by the growing public outcry, finally moved to restrict Thorne's operations. He retaliated with characteristic brutality, threatening livelihoods, spreading rumors, and making life miserable for anyone who dared to oppose him. The town was gripped by a bitter, escalating war. It was during this turbulent period that the unthinkable happened. Elias Thorne was found dead in his mill office, a single, precise bullet wound to his chest. The news ripped through Havenwood like a wildfire, sending shockwaves of disbelief, fear, and a strange, unsettling sense of grim satisfaction through the community. The town's most hated man was gone. The investigation was immediate and intense. The police, unaccustomed to such a violent crime in their quiet town, descended upon Havenwood. Every resident was a suspect, every whispered grievance a potential motive. David and Sarah watched the unfolding drama with a terrifying mix of dread and morbid fascination. With Thorne gone, the secret of Lily's paternity felt both dangerously exposed and strangely, terrifyingly irrelevant. Then came the knock on their door. Not the police, but an old, retired town clerk, a woman named Agnes Finch. Agnes was a repository of Havenwood's history, a living archive of births, deaths, and the intricate, often messy, web of relationships within the community. She was a kind woman, but also sharp-witted and fiercely principled. She had come, she explained, because she had a document, a piece of Havenwood's past that she felt needed to be brought to light. She held a brittle, yellowed envelope. Inside, carefully preserved, was a copy of Sarah's original birth certificate for Lily. But it wasn't the one David knew. This one, filed by a nervous young midwife who had, in a moment of naive honesty, recorded the biological father's name as Elias Thorne, had been immediately amended and suppressed by Thorne's influence and Sarah's terrified insistence. But a copy, a single, damning copy, had remained in Agnes's meticulous private files. Agnes, recognizing the striking resemblance between Thorne and Lily, and knowing Thorne's reputation, had held on to it for years, a silent witness to a hidden injustice. With Thorne's death, she felt it was her duty, a final act of justice for the town, to reveal the truth. She handed the document to David, her eyes filled with a profound sorrow and a quiet resolve. The world stopped for David and Sarah. The secret, the monstrous, suffocating burden they had carried for so long, was now out. Not to the town, not yet, but to someone who held the power to shatter Lily's life. Agnes, seeing the anguish on their faces, promised discretion, but urged them to consider how they would tell Lily. "She deserves to know the truth, dear ones," she said gently, "even if it hurts. Better from you than from someone else." The revelation of the original birth certificate was the final, devastating blow. It meant that every year, every moment they had shielded Lily had been built on quicksand. The immediate aftermath of Thorne's death, the police investigation, the potential for this document to fall into the wrong hands. It was a pressure cooker. They knew they couldn't keep it from Lily any longer. The decision was agonizing but clear. They flew to her college, finding her in the bustling library, engrossed in her studies. The conversation was the hardest they had ever had. They sat her down, their voices trembling, and slowly, painstakingly, unraveling the story of her birth, of Sarah's trauma, of David's agonizing choice, and of the secret that had haunted their lives. They presented the original birth certificate, the undeniable proof, the cold, stark reality of her true paternity. Lily listened, her face draining of color, her bright eyes clouding with disbelief, then confusion, then a profound, shattering pain. She didn't scream, she didn't rage. Instead, a quiet, almost terrifying stillness settled over her. She picked up the document, her fingers tracing the name Elias Thorne, her biological father, the most hated man in Havenwood, the man she had passionately campaigned against. The irony was a cruel twist of the knife. The world she had known, the narrative of her loving, uncomplicated family, shattered into a million pieces. The trust, the foundation of her entire life, felt irrevocably broken. The aftermath was a long, painful journey. Lily retreated into herself, grappling with the unthinkable truth. The initial pain was immense, a searing betrayal that overshadowed everything. David and Sarah, their hearts aching, gave her space, offering their unwavering love and support, patiently waiting for her to process the seismic shift in her identity. It took time, months even, for the initial shock to wear off, for the layers of hurt and confusion to begin to peel away. Eventually, slowly, Lily began to see beyond the initial devastation. She began to understand the impossible choices her parents had faced, the immense love that had driven their deception. She saw Sarah's enduring pain, the scar of a violation that had shaped her life. She saw David's profound sacrifice, his unconditional love, his choice to embrace a child who was not his own, protecting her from a monstrous truth. The anger, initially directed at the secret itself, slowly morphed into a deep, abiding empathy for her parents, and a fierce, righteous anger at Elias Thorne, the true villain of their story. The resolution wasn't a sudden burst of happiness, but a gradual, arduous path towards healing. Lily eventually returned to Havenwood, not as a victim, but as a survivor, armed with the truth and a newfound strength. She confronted the whispers, the knowing glances, with an unwavering gaze. She continued her activism, now with an even deeper understanding of the darkness that could fester beneath the surface of a community. She dedicated herself to fighting for justice, for truth, inspired by the very secret that had nearly destroyed her. Her story, though born of immense tragedy, became a testament to resilience, to the enduring power of love, and to the courage it takes to face the darkest truths and emerge, not unscathed, but unbroken. The legacy of Elias Thorne was not just his wealth or his mill, but the insidious, far-reaching impact of his cruelty. But from that darkness, a different legacy emerged. The unyielding love of a family, forged in adversity, and the courageous spirit of a young woman who found her purpose in the very shadow that threatened to consume her. Her real father was the town's most hated man, but her true parents, the ones who shaped her, loved her, and protected her, were David and Sarah. And that, in the end, was the only truth that truly mattered. This story is a stark reminder that some secrets cast long shadows, shaping lives in ways we can scarcely imagine. But it's also a powerful testament to the human spirit's capacity for resilience, forgiveness, and the enduring strength of love that transcends bloodlines. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel the weight of these characters' struggles, or if it simply piqued your curiosity, please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you want more stories that delve into the hidden corners of human experience. Subscribe to our channel to join our community and never miss another gripping tale. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you're always the first to know when we uncover another truth that will leave you questioning everything. Until next time, stay curious and remember, the most profound stories are often hidden just beneath the surface.